I thought my marriage was unbreakable, but it cracked apart on a random Tuesday night with one careless text message. My name is Henry Lawson, and I'm 45 years old. Each morning I open the garage at Lawson Auto and Repair, the business I built from nothing but calloused hands and determination. The coffee still brews at 5 a.m., but everything else has changed. Andy Lawson, my wife of 17 years, betrayed me with Bret Hart, the smooth-talking parts supplier who'd sat at our dinner table. My daughter Heather Lawson, just 15 then, chose her mother's lies over my truth. The grease under my fingernails felt heavier that night. I didn't throw things. I didn't scream. I documented, planned, and waited. Some men break when betrayed. I hardened. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. And make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. The afternoon sun slanted through the open bay doors of Lawson Auto and Repair, painting gold stripes across the concrete floor. I wiped my hands on a shop rag, leaving behind the dark residue of honest work as I tightened the last bolt on Mrs. Hernandez's F-150. The truck had been running rough for weeks. Timing belt was shot, plus the usual collection of small problems people ignore until they can't anymore. Should run like new now, I called over to Miguel, my senior mechanic. Tell Mrs. Hernandez she's good to go when she comes by. Miguel nodded, making notes on the work order. I stretched my back, feeling the satisfying pop of vertebrae realigning after hours hunched over an engine block. It was nearly 5, almost closing time. Andy's tablet sat on my workbench where she'd left it when she'd stopped by for lunch, saying something about needing to run errands before dinner. I'd been too focused on the truck's timing belt to pay much attention. The tablet pinged with an incoming message. I glanced over, not really meaning to look. Privacy was something I respected. In 17 years of marriage, I'd never checked Andy's phone or email. But the message preview flashed across the lock screen and the words froze me mid-step. Same hotel tonight? From Bret Hart. Bret Hart, the regional parts dealer who'd been supplying my shop for the past 2 years. The same Bret who'd sat at our dinner table last Christmas, complimenting Andy's roast beef. My fingers hovered over the tablet. I could walk away, pretend I hadn't seen it. I didn't. The tablet wasn't locked, another sign Andy never expected me to look. One swipe, and I was scrolling through months of messages, hotel meetups, inside jokes, photos I wished I could unsee. My wife and Bret tangled in sheets I recognized from our own bed. I remember the silence that filled my head. Not rage, not pain, just emptiness, like someone had drained all the oil out of my engine and kept the motor running. Hey boss, you okay? Miguel's voice seemed to come from miles away. I nodded, tucking the tablet under my arm. Fine, just finishing up. Lock up when you're done. I drove home in a fog, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might float away if I loosened my grip. Our house, the one I'd spent weekends renovating while Andy complained about the dust, looked exactly the same. White trim, blue shutters, flower boxes Andy had insisted on, that I watered because she always forgot. Inside, the kitchen gleamed with the granite countertops Andy had demanded last year. I set the tablet down and waited. When Andy walked in at 7:30, she was humming. She stopped when she saw my face. What's wrong? She asked, setting down grocery bags. There was nothing in them but a quart of milk and some fancy cheese, not the errands that had kept her out all afternoon. I slid the tablet across the counter toward her. Bret's looking forward to the same hotel tonight. Her face did this thing, shock, then calculation, then a mask of remorse that never quite reached her eyes. Henry, How long? My voice was dead calm. That surprised me. It's not what you think. 17 messages about how much you enjoyed fucking him last Thursday say otherwise. She flinched at my language, not my accusation. You're never here, Henry. You're at that shop from dawn until dark. What did you expect? Loyalty, I said simply. Honesty. Not this. You chose the shop over me years ago, Andy snapped, dropping the remorse act. Over us. You only notice me when the dinner's late or the lawn needs mowing. I chose to keep this family's wheels turning, I shot back. The shop pays for everything. The granite you wanted, the vacations you planned, Heather's college fund. I didn't choose a stranger's bed. He's not a stranger. Brett understands me. Brett understands how to access my wife and my business at the same time. Pretty efficient. Andy's face hardened. This marriage has been dead for years. You just didn't notice because you were too busy with carburetors and timing belts. Heather appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale. What's going on? Andy immediately softened her voice. Nothing, honey. Your father and I are just having a discussion. About Brett, I said flatly. Heather's eyes widened, darting between us. Mom's friend? Mom's boyfriend, I corrected. Dad! Heather's voice shook with teenage indignation. Why do you always have to ruin everything? You're never happy with anything Mom or I do. This isn't about you, Heather. Yes, it is. You're always a disappointed dad. With both of us. I've been warning about the spending and the lies, I said, matching the hurt in her eyes. That's not disappointment, that's parenting. Andy stepped closer to Heather, chin high. I'm taking Heather. You can keep your tools. I met her gaze evenly. You can keep your boyfriend. You're not taking my business, my house, or the college fund. Heather looked between us, tears welling. Mom needs me. And I need you, I said louder now. But I will not share you with a lie. She grabbed her backpack from a kitchen chair. Andy snatched her car keys from the hook by the door. The sound of that door closing wasn't just wood hitting frame. It was the period at the end of a 17-year sentence. I stood alone in our spotless kitchen, staring at the tablet where every text, every lie, every betrayal glowed in blue and gray bubbles. The life I'd built had just walked out the door, leaving me with nothing but evidence. Morning came like a slap. No smell of coffee brewing, no shower running, no closet doors sliding open and closed. Just silence. I lay there watching dust motes dance in the sunbeam cutting across the bedroom. The closet door stood halfway open. Andy's side a row of empty hangers that swayed slightly in the air conditioning. I forced myself up, one foot then the other. In the bathroom, her toothbrush was gone. The fancy face creams that had crowded the counter had vanished, leaving clean circles in the thin layer of dust. Routine is a lifeline when the world's falling apart. I showered, dressed, made coffee. My hands didn't shake, which surprised me. The quiet was deafening. We'd lived in this house for 12 years, and suddenly every creak, every whisper of the heating system felt amplified. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the chair where Heather should be hunched over her cereal, complaining about an early test. I remembered how she'd looked when she was 8, hair still wet from her shower, concentrating fiercely on writing her spelling words before school. She'd bite her lip exactly like I did when tightening a stubborn bolt. That was before she decided I was the enemy. My phone buzzed with texts from Miguel at the shop. You coming in? Everything okay? I texted back that I'd be late. Some things couldn't be fixed with wrenches and socket sets. At 11:45, the doorbell rang. A courier in a crisp uniform handed me a thick manila envelope. I didn't need to open it to know what it contained, but I did anyway, standing right there in the doorway. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Andy hadn't wasted any time. The courier was barely out of the driveway. I spread the papers across the kitchen table. Andy wanted half my business, the one I'd built from nothing before we even met. She wanted the house, full custody of Heather, and maintenance payments that would cripple me. The shop would have to be sold to satisfy her demands. Everything I'd built would be liquidated. Shock gave way to something colder, something harder. I called Dave Miller, my accountant for the last decade. He listened as I outlined the situation in bullet points like discussing a parts inventory. Jesus, Henry, he said when I finished. She's really going for the throat. Looks that way. You need Alicia Garner, he said without hesitation. She handles divorces where there's a business involved. Let's just say she's not interested in kumbaya mediation sessions. I called her office immediately. Her receptionist offered me an appointment for the following week. Tell her it's an emergency asset protection case, I said. Tell her Dave Miller referred me. An hour later, I was sitting in a sleek downtown office. Alicia Garner didn't waste time on pleasantries. She was all business. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, not a single movement wasted as she scanned the divorce papers. Your wife's attorney is Terry Simmons, she said. eyes still on the documents. He specializes in high-conflict divorces. His strategy is to overwhelm and intimidate. Is it going to work? I asked. She looked up at me, pen tapping once against her desk. That depends. Are you intimidated? No. I'm angry. She nodded, satisfied. Good. Anger is useful if you channel it correctly. Fear is not. She pulled out a yellow legal pad. Tell me about your business. When did you start it? Who's invested? How are the assets titled? I answered each question precisely. Lawson Auto and Repair had been my sole proprietorship for 5 years before marriage. I'd incorporated it 3 years in, with Andy as a minority shareholder for tax purposes. I owned the building outright. The fact that you started the business before marriage helps, Alicia said. But there's going to be a fight about its increase in value during the marriage. What do I do first? I asked. Separate all finances immediately. Open new accounts at different banks. Freeze any joint credit cards. Document everything in the house. Take photos, inventory valuables. Save every text, email, and receipt you can find related to her affair. She looked at me directly. Can you prove the infidelity? I have the messages, I said. Pictures, hotel receipts charged to our joint card. A thin smile crossed her face. Perfect. Bret Hart, you said? The car dealer? I nodded. Interesting conflict of interest there, she murmured, making notes. He's been supplying parts to your business while sleeping with your wife. We might be able to use that. By the time I left her office, I had a detailed battle plan. The cost would be steep, but the alternative was losing everything. That night, I spread paperwork across the dining room table, bank statements, business records, tax returns, building a fortress of facts. My coffee went cold as I sorted through years of financial history, looking for the leverage Alicia had said I'd need. They wanted half my life, I muttered, staring at the documents surrounding me. They'll get what they deserve instead. The morning after meeting with Alicia, I pulled into my shop earlier than usual. The place was silent, tools hanging in their proper places, waiting for hands to bring them to life. I'd built this place from nothing but calluses and determination. I wasn't about to let it slip away. I unlocked my office, pulled out fresh paperwork, and began dismantling my marriage the same way I'd rebuild an engine, methodically, piece by piece. First, the business restructuring. I called my bank and moved the shop's operating accounts to a different institution, one Andy had never set foot in. I transferred the payroll system, redirected vendor payments, and documented every transaction with military precision. Each receipt, each purchase order, each sale, everything filed and backed up in triplicate. When the morning crew arrived, I kept it business as usual. No one needed to know my personal life was imploding. I wore my game face, discussing carburetor replacements and timing belts like nothing had changed. I remember my dad's old advice about car troubles. Find the source of the problem before you start replacing parts. Bret Hart was definitely part of my problem, and I needed to understand exactly how deep his involvement went. 3 days after the divorce papers arrived, I drove across town to Hart's Automotive. The dealership lot gleamed with polished vehicles arranged in perfect rows, just like Bret's perfect smile when he saw me walking through the showroom doors. Henry Lawson. His voice boomed across the marble-floored space. He extended his hand like we were still business associates. What brings you by? I shook his hand, keeping my expression neutral. Just checking on that parts order. The timing's gotten complicated lately. His smile flickered just enough for me to notice. He knew exactly what I was saying beneath the words. Let's talk in my office, he said, gesturing toward the back. His office was everything mine wasn't. Sleek, modern, not a speck of grease anywhere. The walls displayed photos of Bret with local celebrities, his arm around various women at charity events. None with Andy. At least he was discreet about that. So, he leaned back in his leather chair. Parts delivery. I can assure you everything's on schedule. That's good to hear, I said, studying his face. I've been doing some accounting lately, making sure everything lines up. The slight narrowing of his eyes told me everything. Accounting? A small laugh. Not usually a mechanic's favorite pastime. You'd be surprised what you find when you start looking closely at records. I replied. Patterns emerge. Connections become clear. Brett's confident smile remained, but something behind his eyes shifted. He knew I knew, and I knew he knew. Neither of us said it aloud. Well, he cleared his throat. If there are any discrepancies in our business arrangements, I'm sure everything will balance out in the end, I cut in. That's how these things work, right? Everything eventually gets what it deserves. The conversation continued like this, surface-level business talk layered with silent understanding. When I left, I could feel his eyes following me across the parking lot. That night, I sat at my dining room table with Alicia's checklist in front of me. I'd already printed the hotel receipts, months of them, showing Brett's name alongside charges to Andy's card linked to our joint account. Some dated back 18 months. The betrayal had roots deeper than I'd realized. I remembered anniversaries spent alone because Andy had girls' weekends, birthdays when she'd been visiting her sister. All lies, all documented now in black and white. Alicia called around 10 o'clock. I've built the timeline, she said, all business. The affair coincides perfectly with the unusual withdrawals from your accounts. We can demonstrate a pattern of financial theft alongside the infidelity. Good, I said simply. Have you heard from Heather? She asked. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Heather's name appeared on the screen. Hold on, I told Alicia. I played the message on speaker. Dad? Heather's voice was tight with anger. Mom told me you're freezing the accounts and threatening to take everything. Why are you being so controlling? So cold? You're the one driving this family apart, not her. Just stop it. The message ended. I didn't delete it. That's helpful, actually, Alicia said after a moment. Save it. Their narrative is already forming. You're the villain, they're the victims. We'll need to counter that. After we hung up, I drove past Andy's new apartment, a luxury complex on the east side of town. Brett's silver Mercedes sat in the visitor's parking space right out front for everyone to see. Not hiding anymore. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the evening air whistling through my cracked window. You made your choice, I whispered. I'll make mine count. The courthouse steps were slick from morning rain when I arrived. Alicia walked beside me, her heels clicking with purpose, case files tucked under her arm. She'd prepared me for this. How the courtroom would feel, how Andy would look, what her lawyer would say. Remember, she murmured as we reached the doors. No reactions. No matter what they claim. I nodded, my jaw tight. I learned that lesson watching engines fail. The quieter you stay, the more you hear. Inside, the courtroom had that polished wood smell that reminded me of church pews and funeral homes. Andy sat at the table across from ours. Blonde hair swept into a perfect twist, hands folded like she was praying. She wore a pale blue dress that made her look soft, vulnerable. Her attorney, a silver-haired man with expensive cufflinks, leaned close, whispering strategy. She glanced up as we entered. For a half second, our eyes met before she looked away, dabbing at nothing with a tissue. Right on cue, Alicia whispered, arranging our files precisely on the table. When the judge entered, an older woman with sharp eyes and zero patience for theatrics, we rose, then sat, and the performance began. Andy's lawyer went first, weaving a story about a neglected wife, a workaholic husband who left her alone while he built his business, how she'd sought emotional support and made a regrettable mistake in a moment of weakness. Mrs. Lawson simply wants what's fair after supporting her husband's dream for 20 years, he concluded, his voice dripping with reasonableness. She raised their daughter while he worked 16-hour days. She deserves equitable division of assets and appropriate alimony. Andy kept her eyes down, nodding slightly. The perfect picture of a wronged woman. The judge turned to Alicia. Ms. Garner? Alicia stood, her face calm. Your Honor, what we have here isn't a story of neglect. It's a straightforward case of infidelity coupled with financial misappropriation. She approached with our first exhibit. Bank statements showing withdrawals from our joint account corresponding exactly with hotel stays. Mr. Lawson didn't abandon his family for his business. He built that business for his family. Next came the photos, surveillance images from the bank where Andy had accessed Heather's college fund. timestamps matching deposits into a separate account opened 6 months prior. Mrs. Lawson diverted over $28,000 from her daughter's education fund to finance vacations with Mr. Bret Hart. Andy's face tightened. Her lawyer whispered urgently to her. Alicia continued relentlessly, presenting airline tickets, resort charges, all while Andy had claimed to be visiting her sister or attending weekend workshops. The evidence mounted in neat, devastating piles on the judge's desk. I watched the judge's expression change gradually from neutral to ice cold as she reviewed each document. And finally, Alicia said, the lease agreement for an apartment signed 3 months before Mrs. Lawson filed for divorce, an apartment she shares with Mr. Hart despite claiming to need substantial alimony for living expenses. Andy's lawyer attempted damage control, claiming I had been emotionally unavailable, that Andy's actions were desperate measures taken by a lonely woman. But his argument sounded hollow against the wall of evidence Alicia had built. When the judge delivered her ruling, her voice was clipped with disapproval. The court finds insufficient grounds for alimony given the documented financial impropriety. The marital home and business shall remain with Mr. Lawson. Mrs. Lawson's request for half the business assets is denied, based on evidence of existing financial misconduct. Andy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her lawyer's shoulders slumped. The judge continued, outlining the division of remaining assets and setting a follow-up date regarding the college fund restitution. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction as Andy's carefully constructed narrative crumbled. Outside, rain had stopped, leaving the world looking washed clean. Alicia shook my hand firmly. "First round goes to us," she said. "Be prepared, they'll regroup." I nodded, watching Andy emerge from the courthouse, her lawyer close behind. She saw me looking and turned away, phone already pressed to her ear. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, reviewing paperwork by lamplight when my phone buzzed with a notification. A neighbor had tagged me in something on social media. I clicked the link. Heather's face filled my screen, eyes red, voice shaky. Behind her was Andy's apartment. "I have to speak up," she was saying, wiping at tears. "My dad. He's punishing my mom because he can't stand losing control. He's always been like this, cold, demanding, keeping track of everything we did wrong." My stomach twisted as I watched her distort every memory, every moment. He's taking everything from us because he's abusive that way. Not with his fists, but with his power, his money. He controls people. He's destroying my mom because she finally tried to be happy. Comments were pouring in beneath the video, strangers offering support, expressing outrage. The clip had already been shared hundreds of times. I set the phone down carefully, the light from the screen illuminating my still face in the dimness of the kitchen. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the empty rooms of my house. "If the law didn't finish them," I whispered, "the truth will." The video hit like a wildfire. By morning, my phone was lighting up, but not with the usual service calls or parts inquiries. The messages came from customers canceling appointments. "We'll be taking our business elsewhere," read one. "Not comfortable supporting someone like you," said another. I walked through the shop that morning, my footsteps echoing in empty bays where cars should have been. Miguel, my head mechanic, gave me a sideways glance. "Boss, what's happening?" "Johnson canceled his transmission rebuild. The Millers pulled their SUV service. We've got 3 empty lifts." I handed him a clipboard. "Call these regulars, offer them a discount. We'll weather this." Truth was, I didn't know if we would. 20 years of reputation building, and Heather had torn it down in a 3-minute video. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Dale. "Thought you should see this. They're not even hiding it anymore." The attached photo showed Andy's apartment complex. Brett's Lexus was parked out front, and through the first-floor window, I could make out what looked like a small gathering. People raising glasses, Andy's blonde head thrown back in laughter. A party. My business was bleeding customers, and they were celebrating. I set my phone face down on my desk and stared at the wall for a solid minute. Then I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. If they wanted war, I'd give them execution by paperwork. I remember my dad's shop when I was a kid, the smell of grease and metal, the sound of ratchets clicking. "Tools don't lie," he'd tell me. "Neither does paper. When someone's trying to screw you over, Henry, make sure you've got it in writing. That night, I drove to the bank and emptied our safe deposit box. Inside were property deeds, insurance policies, and business contracts, all with both our names. I made copies of everything before heading to Alicia's office the next morning. I need to remove Andy's name from everything, I told her, placing the stack on her desk. The business, the accounts, everything. Alicia nodded, already sorting through the papers. Smart move. She's trying to poison your reputation while maintaining legal claim to your assets. We'll shut that down. For the next 2 weeks, I lived between the shop and various offices. Notary public, county clerk, insurance agents. I signed new contracts, filed amendments, restructured the business under sole proprietorship. Every signature felt like another brick in a wall between my life and theirs. The customers who stayed were loyal, but the calendar remained half empty. I heard through Miguel that Brett was directing people to other repair shops, probably getting kickbacks. Let him, I said. Every dollar he makes that way is evidence. I started an audit trail. Every canceled appointment, every social media comment, every bank statement showing declining revenue, all cataloged and dated. Cause and effect. Defamation has a price tag. Then came the real discovery. While reorganizing financial records, I found discrepancies in our tax filings from the previous year. Places where Andy had reported business expenses that never existed. Further digging revealed personal purchases disguised as business needs, vendor kickbacks going to a separate account, and modifications to our joint return that I'd never approved. I laid everything out on my dining room table that night. Bank statements, tax documents, text messages between Andy and Brett discussing the arrangement. The evidence formed a perfect circle of fraud. On my TV, I replayed Heather's video again. I paused on her tear-streaked face, her expression so earnest as she lied about me. You wanted to pick sides? I said softly to the frozen image. You just picked consequences. The next morning, I visited Alicia with everything I'd found. She reviewed the documents carefully, her eyes narrowing as she calculated. This is tax fraud, Henry. Clear and documented. The IRS doesn't care about divorce drama or social media. They care about numbers that don't add up. So what do? She handed me a large manila envelope. We make 3 copies. 1 for our records, 1 for the court, and 1 for the state auditor and IRS. That afternoon, I organized every document chronologically, attached a detailed cover letter, and placed it all into the envelope. Each paper represented another nail in the coffin they thought they were building for me. As I signed my name on the envelope, my pen didn't hesitate or shake. The signature was crisp, deliberate, like putting my name to a promise. 3 weeks crawled by like rust spreading over metal, silent but relentless. I kept my head down at the shop, focusing on the customers who stayed loyal. The calendar was still patchy, but the bleeding had slowed. I was starting to see the same faces returning. Word spreads in a small town, both ways. It was Miguel who brought me the news first, rolling in under a customer's Subaru with a grin I could see even from under the chassis. You hear about Hart's dealership? He asked, voice bouncing off the concrete floor. I didn't look up from the brake line I was replacing. What about it? Place is crawling with guys in suits. Not the sales kind, the government kind. Clipboards, serious faces. Been there since yesterday morning. I nodded, feeling nothing but a cold, steady certainty. The wheels I'd set in motion were turning exactly as designed. That right? Yeah. Tommy's cousin works there in parts. Said they're pulling records, checking serial numbers against inventory. Something about improper documentation and tax discrepancies. I remembered summer cookouts years ago. Brett standing at my grill, bourbon in hand, telling me how he worked the system with his business. I'd thought he meant clever marketing. Turns out he meant fraud. Things have a way of catching up, I said, tightening the last bolt. By the end of the week, the news was everywhere. Brett's dealership had its accounts frozen pending a full investigation. The local paper ran a small piece about financial irregularities and potential commingling of assets involving personal accounts under multiple names. Anyone who knew us could read between those lines. I was up to my elbows in an engine rebuild when my phone lit up with Andy's name. For a second, I just stared at it, We hadn't spoken directly since the courtroom. I wiped my hands and answered, "What do you want, Andy?" "What the hell have you done?" Her voice was shrill, the kind of angry that comes from fear. "I haven't done anything except protect what's mine." "You're ruining my life," she was screaming now. I could picture her face flushed red the way it used to get during our worst arguments. "The auditors are saying Brett might face charges. They're looking at my accounts too." "Do you understand what you've done?" I set down my wrench. The shop was quiet except for the distant sound of Miguel's radio. "You did that yourself the day you lied," I said evenly. "Every false document, every diverted dollar, every faked expense. That was you, not me. I just made sure the right people saw the evidence." "Evidence? You. The IRS doesn't care about our divorce, Andy. They care about fraud." Her voice broke. "We're going to lose everything. You already chose to throw away everything that mattered. The rest is just stuff." I hung up before she could respond. There was no satisfaction in her panic, just a cold, hollow sense that the scales were finally balancing. Later that afternoon, Heather's name appeared on my phone. My finger hesitated over the screen before accepting. "Dad." She sounded smaller, younger. "Dad, you have to stop this." "Stop what exactly?" "Whatever you're doing to Mom and Brett. The auditors, the legal stuff. Mom's freaking out. She says we might lose the apartment." I closed my eyes, remembered her online video, her tears as she called me controlling and abusive. How many strangers had watched that? How many believed it? Actions have consequences, Heather. "But Dad, you made your choice. You chose lies over truth. Now you get to live with what comes next. Please, just listen." I hung up mid-sentence. Maybe that was cruel, but Mercy had left the building a long time ago. The next day, I heard Brett's investors had pulled out. The day after, 3 of his salespeople quit. Miguel's buddy in part said Brett was hiding invoices, staying late shredding documents. The walls were closing in. I kept working, replacing timing belts, rebuilding transmissions, signing new contracts with parts suppliers who used to deal exclusively with Brett. My calendar was filling up again. Life has a rhythm. Stick to it long enough, and you'll outlast the chaos. Friday evening, I was alone in the shop closing up. The place smelled like oil and metal. Honest smells that meant honest work. My phone buzzed with a text from Alicia. "Asset freeze approved. Full audit proceeding. Civil case being prepared." I stood there in the half-dark shop, reading those words over and over. Then I set the phone down, locked the front door, and drove home. Across town, according to what I'd hear later, Brett sat alone in his empty showroom as the power was shut off, leaving him in darkness. I stopped counting days after the first year, stopped marking time by how long they'd been gone. It was easier to measure my life in oil changes and rebuilt transmissions, in bank statements that showed recovery. The shop was doing better than ever. Turns out integrity has market value when you're the only mechanic in 3 counties who won't pad the bill. 3 winters came and went. I expanded the shop, hired 2 more techs, and put in a proper customer lounge with decent coffee. The house stayed the same, though. Never saw a reason to change what worked. That night, nearly 3 years since the divorce finalized, was bitter cold for April. Rain drummed against the windows, the kind that feels like it's carrying ice. I sat at my workbench in the converted garage, space heater humming near my feet, reviewing receipts from the day's jobs. The clock on the wall read 1:47 a.m. Sleep, and I had made our peace. 4, sometimes 5 hours a night. Enough to function, not enough for dreams. The knock was so faint I thought it might be a branch against the window. Then it came again, 3 rapid taps, deliberate, human. I set down my reading glasses, instinct making me reach for the heavy flashlight before heading to the door. Nobody comes calling at 2 in the morning with good news. Through the peephole, a distorted face peered back. Rain-slicked hair, pale skin, familiar eyes. I felt something shift in my chest, but I kept it locked down tight. I opened the door. Heather stood there drenched. Water ran in rivulets down her face. Maybe tears mixed in, hard to tell. She clutched a duffel bag with white knuckles. She'd grown taller, thinner. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes older than her 19 years. "Dad," she said, voice barely audible over the rain. I didn't speak, just waited. Mom kicked me out. Her words tumbled out in a rush. Brett said, he said I'm old enough to pay rent now, that I'm not their problem anymore. She swallowed hard, rain dripping from her chin. I don't have anywhere else to go. The memory of her online video flashed through my mind. The accusations, the tears for the camera, the damage. You need a place to stay? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Relief flickered across her face. Yes. Please. I stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in, you're getting soaked. She hurried inside, standing awkwardly on the mat, water pooling around her sneakers. The duffel looked light, not much to show for the life she'd chosen. I didn't hug her, didn't offer to take her bag. Instead, I walked to the desk and picked up a clipboard with papers I'd prepared long ago, just in case this day ever came. You want help? I asked, holding it out to her. Sign this. Confusion replaced relief. What is it? Affidavits. Statements confirming what your mother did with your college fund. The fraud with the loan documents. The lies you both told in court and online. I held her gaze. You sign, you get a roof. You don't sign, you find somewhere else. She blinked, tears forming for real now. Dad, This isn't a negotiation, Heather. You chose her side when it was convenient. Now you want my help when it's convenient. That's not how this works anymore. Her hands shook as she took the clipboard. Is this legal? Every word. Alicia drew them up. Nothing in there isn't true, and you know it. She stared at the papers, water dripping from her hair onto the pages. For a moment I thought she might throw the clipboard and walk back into the storm. But something in her had changed too. She sat down at the kitchen table, grabbed a pen, and signed each page. When she handed it back, I checked each signature. There are rules, I said, setting the clipboard aside. You'll work at the shop, filing, phones, basic bookkeeping. You'll pay back what you helped spend from your college fund. You'll live in the apartment above the garage, not here. You pay utilities. You keep it clean. She nodded, looking small. This isn't family reconciliation, I continued. It's a business arrangement. We don't talk about the past. We don't discuss your mother or Brett. You broke trust. This is how you earn it back. I understand, she whispered. I handed her a set of keys. The side door leads upstairs. Bathroom works. Heat's electric. There's a bed and basic furniture. I gestured toward the back door. You should go get settled. We open at 7. She stood, hefting her damp duffel. At the door, she paused. Thank you. I didn't answer. Some words were too empty to acknowledge. After she left, I watched through the window as she made her way through the rain to the shop. She climbed the outside stairs slowly, like each step cost something. Inside the apartment, a light came on. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could see her silhouette as she stood at the window, looking out at a world that no longer resembled anything she recognized. Morning arrived with steel-gray light through my bedroom window. I'd slept 4 hours, maybe 5. It didn't matter. Some days run on coffee and focus. I made a pot, strong enough to stand a wrench in, and checked my phone. One message from Alicia. Meeting at 8:30. Bring the statements. At 7 sharp, I unlocked the shop. No sign of Heather yet. I flipped on the lights, breathed in the familiar scent of oil and rubber. This place had been my sanctuary through everything, steady when the rest of life wasn't. At 7:15, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heather appeared, hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a plain blue shirt. Dark circles under her eyes said she'd slept about as well as I had. Morning, she said. I nodded toward the small office. Customer files need organizing, alphabetical, then by date of service. No, how'd you sleep? No, want some breakfast? Just work. She understood, and disappeared into the office without another word. At 8:25, I grabbed my jacket and the folder with her statements. I'll be back in a couple hours. Answer the phones if they ring. Write down messages. She nodded, not looking up from the filing cabinet. Alicia's office smelled of coffee and laser printer toner. She stood when I entered, all business in a charcoal suit, hair pulled back severely. You got the statements? She asked, hand extended. I placed the folder in her palm. Signed and dated. She leafed through the pages, nodding as she read. This is exactly what we needed. The final piece. She reached for her phone. Let me make the call. It took less than 15 minutes. 15 minutes to set fire to the world Andy and Brett had built on lies. Alicia spoke in clipped professional terms to someone at the district attorney's office, confirming they had everything needed for the warrants. When she hung up, she almost smiled. Assets will be frozen by noon. Search warrants for their home, Brett's office, and their personal vehicles will be executed by end of day. She tapped the signed statements. Your daughter's testimony connects all the dots. Clear line from the money they took to the fraud they committed. I sat motionless, processing. Henry, Alicia said, gentler now. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once I file these, there's no taking it back. Your ex-wife and Brett will likely face criminal charges. I met her gaze. File them. Back at the shop, I worked on a Ford F-150 with a transmission issue. Simple, methodical work. The kind that lets your mind empty out. By noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Alicia. Warrants executed, assets frozen. I wiped my hands and looked up toward the office window. Heather was visible through the glass, head bent over paperwork. She had no idea what had just started. The afternoon unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. At 2:17, my phone rang. Andy, I declined the call. At 2:18, she called again. I declined. At 2:19, 2:20, 2:21. Finally, I answered. What have you done? Her voice shattered through the speaker. They froze everything. They're at Brett's dealership right now. They took my laptop. Is that all? I asked, my voice level. You bastard, she screamed. This is because Heather left, isn't it? You couldn't stand. This is because you stole money, lied in court, and thought consequences were for other people. I kept my tone even, tightening a bolt on the engine in front of me. Goodbye, Andy. I hung up, muted the phone, and went back to work. By 4:30, the local news had picked up the story. The shop's small TV in the corner showed footage of investigators carrying boxes from Brett's dealership. I could see him in the background, red-faced, arguing with a man in a suit while uniformed officers stood nearby. At 5:45, another text from Alicia. Brett tried to destroy files, arrested for obstruction and tampering. At 7:15, the evening news ran the mugshot. Andy Lawson, her carefully maintained makeup smeared by tears, hair disheveled, eyes vacant with shock. The woman who'd once stood in court claiming I was controlling now stood accused of financial fraud, tax evasion, and misappropriation of funds. I looked up at the office window again. Heather had switched on the small TV up there too. I could see her silhouette, motionless, watching her mother's face on the screen. Watching the mother she'd defended, the one she'd left with, the one she'd made videos supporting, now infamous, her crimes exposed for everyone to see. I went back to the transmission, sliding parts into place with steady hands. That's debt paid, I muttered to myself, closing up the housing. From the corner of my eye, I saw Heather's face pressed against the office window, paper white in the gathering darkness. Something had changed in her expression. The last traces of childhood naivety replaced by harsh understanding. She'd finally seen the cost of blind loyalty, tallied in mugshots and frozen accounts and public disgrace. She'd chosen a side. Now she was watching it fall. 10 months crawled by, each one grinding down the gears of Andy and Brett's former life. The sentencing came down like a hammer on a cold Tuesday morning. I sat in the back of the courtroom, hands folded, watching Andy's shoulders slump when the judge announced 5 years in county prison. Her designer outfit had been replaced by department store basics, her salon-perfect hair now flat and dull. The woman who once commanded rooms could barely lift her eyes as they led her away. Brett got 2 years for obstruction plus a permanent ban from the automotive industry. He tried to argue even then. The judge cut him off mid-sentence. Some men never learn when to stop digging their hole deeper. I didn't feel the rush of victory people expect. Just quiet certainty that the scales had finally balanced. Back at Lawson Auto and Repair, business picked up steadily. People have short memories when it comes to scandal, especially when you fix their cars right the first time. The empty bays filled again with Fords and Chevys, Hondas and Toyotas. Our waiting room had the same worn magazines and coffee pot it always did. Life has a way of returning to its rhythms. Upstairs in the apartment over the garage, Heather lived by the rules I'd set: minimum wage for filing, answering phones, and basic bookkeeping. Rent due on the first of each month. No special treatment, no family discounts. Just business. We passed like ships in a narrow channel, close enough to see each other, never close enough to touch. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, something unspoken in her eyes. I never asked what it was. Her old life collapsed around her in slow motion. Friends stopped calling after the trial made the papers. College applications returned with polite rejections. Every time she interviewed elsewhere, they'd Google her name and suddenly positions would be filled. Her mother's choices had branded her by association. I never softened, never offered comfort. You can't learn to swim if someone's always throwing you a life preserver. So I watched her struggle, knowing some lessons leave scars that teach better than any words could. One humid August evening, I was going through invoices when Heather knocked on my office door. She held a bank slip in her hand. "It's the last payment," she said, voice steady. "I've paid back everything, with interest." I took the slip, checked the numbers, and nodded once. "Is that all you have to say?" she asked. I looked up, meeting her eyes. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know, something, anything." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've been here almost a year. And now your debt is clear," I said simply. "Right." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm leaving town. Found a place 3 states over where nobody knows my name or Mom's." I nodded, unsurprised. "When?" "Tomorrow, before dawn." The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things neither of us would say. No apologies offered, none accepted. "Make it count this time," I finally told her. She nodded once and closed the door. By morning, her apartment was empty, clean to the same spotless state I'd given it to her. Keys on the counter, not even a note. Some goodbyes are cleaner that way. Life went on. The shop prospered. I hired a new receptionist. Older woman, reliable, no drama. Months rolled by in the steady rhythm of oil changes and transmission work. Word reached me through mutual connections that Heather was struggling. Sleeping on couches, taking whatever work came her way, running with people who'd drag her down if she let them. The kind of life that's one bad decision away from no return ticket. I wasn't surprised when my phone buzzed one night around midnight. The text was simple. "Dad, I need help. Please, just for a little while." I read it once, sighed, then deleted it. Some lessons can't be handed down like an inheritance. They have to be lived hour by brutal hour until they sink into your bones. I'd learned mine. She needed to learn hers. The following week, I drove past the county prison during visiting hours. Andy was inside those walls, scrubbing floors under fluorescent lights. I didn't stop. The newspaper mentioned Brett was back in court, arguing over unpaid restitution, still trying to talk his way out of consequences. And somewhere 3 states away, Heather was serving coffee in a roadside diner according to the last update I'd heard. Quieter now. Humbler. Learning what I'd had to learn. Self-reliance isn't optional. It's survival. I locked up the shop at dusk, hanging my wrench on the wall beside my father's old tools. The silence wrapped around me like an old friend. "Justice doesn't roar," I said softly to the empty garage. "It hums steady like an engine that never stalls. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.